psychopathology, we're always examining psychopathology within the context of normative and typical patterns of development. So just a reminder from other courses, I know you've studied what intelligence is and how it's defined. So just as a little refresher, intelligence includes the ability to understand complex ideas, to learn from experience, to adapt effectively to the environment, to engage in reasoning. It includes both basic mental tasks such as perception, as well as higher level skills such as problem solving, creativity, and planning. It also involves particular processes such as your processing speed and your ability to learn the pace at which you learn and understand things, and even your working memory capacity. There are three major different models of intelligence in terms of defining intelligence by its components, what comprises intelligence, not just the skills that are associated, but what are the components. So you might recall Spearman's G-factor view. So this is one of the historical perspectives suggesting that intelligence comes in one discrete package and it's a single unitary competence that explains all other skills and behaviors. So that's Spearman's G-factor, or general intelligence. Multiple intelligence, best known for Gardner's work on MI, or multiple intelligences theory, and Sternberg's triarchic model of intelligence, where there's three different intelligences. In this view of multiple intelligences, the idea is that there's not one package of intelligence, but a variety, implying that you could be very strong, for example, in Gardner's musical intelligence, very weak in interpersonal intelligence, and maybe somewhere in the middle in terms of your bodily kinesthetic intelligence. The hierarchy view of intelligences suggests that G is related in different ways to more specific skills and also to some broad factors. So the most common or well-known hierarchical model of intelligence is probably Carroll's three-stratum theory. This is pretty widely accepted today, I would say, in the field, the idea that there is some underlying G factor and it correlates to a greater or lesser degree with more specific skills such as vocabulary or math, reasoning, for example. All right. All right, so now this little girl, still in normative development here, this little girl is asking us, what are the nature and nurture-based influences on intelligence and cognitive development? So twin and adoption studies suggest that genes influence somewhere around 50% of the variation in intelligence. So we see pretty high heritability in intelligence. Some recent research suggests that the genetic contribution to intelligence becomes larger throughout development, sort of even more of the genetics sort of show up later in childhood and adolescence throughout the developmental period. So the idea would be that some of these genetic factors don't show up until later in developmental periods. But when they do, that's showing that genetic contribution getting even larger over time. Much of the individual differences in genetic aspects of intelligence pertain to brain structure and function, right? So we know that brain size is positively correlated with intelligence. We also know that much of our intellectual capabilities are housed in the prefrontal cortex, so we see individual differences there, and also individual differences in the dopamine system. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter linked to being imaginative, curious, and intellectual. From the nurture perspective, there are a variety of environmental factors that impact intelligence. So everything from maternal drug use or exposure to other terogens in the prenatal period, things like alcohol, drugs, radiation. Also, once the baby is born, the parental responsiveness to that child, how much the parents value education and academics, what their own level of education is comes into play, and even birth order. Poverty is probably the most widely discussed environmental factor that influences intelligence, and the mechanisms by which poverty influences intelligence are varied. Everything from nutrition and diet to the level of health care that children receive, and the amount of intellectual stimulation coming from parents and coming from home, and even the quality of neighborhoods and schools. All right. So now at this point, we are going to actually just review the specific disorder that's our focus today, intellectual developmental disorder, otherwise abbreviated as IDD. So we'll start with the DSM-5 criteria. The features of IDD, intellectual and adaptive functioning deficits in conceptual, social, and practical domains. So let's talk about what those domains mean. Conceptual basically means academic domains, things like reading and writing and other academic type of competencies. The social domain, your ability to relate to others, have empathy, communicate. And the practical domain relates to things like self-care and your ability to be independent and do things on your own. Get your own food, get yourself dressed, bathe, etc. So we see 3 criteria. In the case of IDD, all 3 of these diagnostic criteria need to be evident to get the diagnosis. So the first one here, deficits in intellectual functions, and there are some examples. Reasoning, problem solving, planning, abstract thinking, judgment, and learning. Deficits in adaptive functioning, the result in failure to meet developmental and sociocultural standards for independence and personal responsibility. So this is all considered in terms of same age peers, right? So what do we expect a 7-year-old to be able to do? Do we expect a 12-year-old to be able to get dressed on their own? Yes. Maybe even get themselves a snack, right? So that's what we mean by developmental and also sociocultural standards for independence. The deficits in this area need to limit functioning in one or more activities in daily life. So we might see communication issues, social participation might be interfered with, and an inability to live independently if we're talking about an adolescent or an adult. And the third criteria is that the onset needs to be during the developmental period. So in other words, during toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence is when we see the onset of these symptoms. When you get the diagnosis, there's a specification of degree and severity, right? So is it a mild IDD, moderate, severe, or profound? All right.